Welcome to Cooking School with Mama Rowe. I'm your host, Ashley Rowe. And on this episode, we are going to be making homemade meatballs and spaghetti sauce. We are going to show you how we make the meatballs, form them, put them in the pot, let them cook a little bit and brown up on the sides, and then we're going to make our sauce in that same pot and put the meatballs back in it to let all the flavors meld together. Coming up next, our meatballs. To make our meatballs, the ingredients, equipment, and utensils you will need are a good shredded Parmesan cheese, salt and pepper, olive oil or oil, panko breadcrumbs, 1 pound each of ground beef and pork, 3 eggs, parsley, and garlic. The utensils and equipment you will need are dry measuring cups and spoons, an ice cream scoop, a fork, a food processor. If you don't have one, you're going to have to use your knife a little more, which is okay. A chef's knife, a clean mixing bowl, a small frying pan, and last but not least, a heavy-duty Dutch oven or large pot. Our garlic and parsley are at this stage here to be put into our food processor to make sure that it's finely minced or chopped. If you do not have a food processor at all, please feel free to use your knife and mince the garlic and the parsley like we did last episode for the chicken noodle soup. But since I have a small food processor or food processor in general, I'm just going to put the parsley into the food processor along with the garlic that I've chopped a decent amount, and we're just putting it in the food processor to get it small enough that it's not pungent when it's in the meatball, that it's not big chunks. So like I said, if you don't have a food processor, please chop it up finely. Here is our garlic and parsley minced up into nice pieces so that it's not too much in one bite in the meatball. I like to take my rubber spatula and just kind of scoop it out into the mixture. This mixture that I'm pouring this into is our 2 pounds of ground beef and pork, 1 pound each, our Parmesan, our salt and pepper, and our panko breadcrumbs. And I took the panko as I put it in there after I measured it and put it between my fingers to kind of crumble it up a little more. Now, our beaten eggs. You can see here I broke the yolk with my fork. I'm just going to beat it for a couple seconds. It doesn't need to be overly beat. And we're just going to add it into our mixture as well. Use your fork to get as much out as possible. And then we're just going to use our hands. Clean hands that are jewelry free so you don't get the meat all up in your jewelry if you wear rings. And we're just going to use our fingers and just work it in. You kind of want to do it like a claw motion and then just mix it up. Just claw it, put it down, because you want to mix the beef and the pork together with the egg and everything else. You don't want to over mix it, so don't be too rough with it, but you make sure that everything is incorporated. We have heated our skillet with a little bit of oil in it, and we have formed a patty after mixing everything together in our meat mixture. We are basically doing this to make sure that our meat is seasoned properly. So you let this cook and brown, you let it brown, cook all the way through, and then you taste it after it's cooled to make sure that your seasoning is on point and you don't need to add any other seasoning to your mixture. This is actually a little hot, so we're going to turn it down. And it shouldn't take longer than 1.5 minutes total to cook this. You can take your spatula and push it down a little bit to make it a little thinner, cook it all the way through if it'll detach from my spatula. Come on. There we go. You just want to make sure it's cooked all the way through, because when you taste it, you don't want to eat raw meat. We've taken our patty, our little miniature patty, it looks like it's for SpongeBob, out of the pan. And you are finished with that pan, so you don't need it anymore. We're just gonna like pull the grease off a little bit and let it cool till it's able to touch and you can taste it without burning your tongue. and the seasoning is on point. I don't feel like we need any more salt or garlic or pepper. So you can finish eating this and start making your meatballs. When forming your meatballs, I'm taking my scoop and I'm just getting a little bit in there. I'm not packing it into the scoop. I get it out of the scoop and I lightly move it into a ball. We're not gonna pack it into a ball and make it like you would with Play-Doh. This is delicate because the more that you play with it and the harder that you press it, the more tough that your meat is gonna be when it's cooked. So we're just making it into a ball. We're just forming it and leaving it alone. We've heated our large Dutch oven or pot, whichever you have, and put some oil in the bottom of it. We have formed our meatballs to about 2.5 inches. It's about the size of a golf ball. And we're just putting them in the hot oil. Now I formed them inside my bowl here with my ice cream scoop, so you can see that. Now when I take them out, it's so that I have room and they're all getting evenly cooked and one's not cooking faster than the other. You don't want to crowd the pot, so that's probably the amount I can put in there. We're going to take a pair of tongs and flip them and brown them on all sides and then remove them. We're not cooking them all the way through because they're going to continue to cook in the sauce. Your meatballs may stick to the bottom of the pot a little bit, which is okay. Just kind of gently move them around with your tongs. Sometimes that means, especially with chicken, that it's not ready to be flipped, but this just may mean that your heat is a little too high, which is okay. So we're gonna flip them around to brown all sides, and then once the outsides are browned, we're going to remove them into a different bowl. And like I said before, it's gonna cook through in the sauce. So if they're not cooked all the way through, that's okay. But you can see how we have a deep golden brown on the outside, and that's what you want. The equipment and ingredients you will need to make your spaghetti sauce are 2 cans of San Marzano tomatoes, salt, pepper, oil, onion, garlic, fresh basil, and the meatballs that you've been making. Your equipment, you will need a wet measuring cup, obviously a can opener, a long-handled spoon, a chef knife, and the heavy Dutch oven pot that you have been cooking your meatballs in. We have cooked our meatballs, and if you look carefully, you can see that they're still kind of red on the inside there, but they're brown on most of the edges, and there's some brown bits in there as well. So on the bottom of our pan, there are brown bits. Now because I have a cast iron pan, mine's a little hot when I touch it. So if you need to get a towel, a dry towel, or a pot holder. There's some brown bits here, you can kind of scrape some of them off, but what we're gonna do is add some oil to the pan, just a little bit more, and we are going to add our onions and saute them until they're about translucent. When they are almost to that translucent stage, like we did with our chicken noodle soup, we are going to add the garlic so the garlic does not burn. Please use your bench scraper, back of your knife, hands, however you need to transfer your onion to the pan or the pot. Please go ahead and do so. So we're just going to continue to cook our onions until they're about translucent, and then we'll add our garlic, and then I'll show you how to add the tomatoes. We have stirred our garlic in, and we're letting it brown just a little bit and cook down to a soft state like our onions. Now we added it in later, just a reminder, because we don't want it to burn. So we've opened our can of San Marzano tomatoes, and I just want to show you, use your clean hands for this, and just be careful because the red sauce will splatter everywhere. So our tomato is here, and all you do is just take your hand and squish it up and drop it into the pot. You can do this in the can, but sometimes it gets a little, see, it squishes everywhere. It gets a little messy, so just be careful. And if you're doing it into the pot like this or into the can, Into the pot, make sure you don't touch the side of the pot and burn yourself, and into the can, make sure you don't cut yourself on the edge of the can as well. So just take both of the cans and squish them up as much as possible, and then you're gonna pour the leftover juices from the can into the pot. And then we're just gonna stir it up and add some salt and pepper. Now that we've added our tomatoes, after we crush them and put the sauce in here, we've stirred in some salt and pepper and just kind of mix this around. This is also the part where you add water. I would suggest taking your can with it all running down the side, take your finger, scoop it up, and rub it back into the can. Now your can has residual tomato juice. Please take a little bit of water and rinse this out into your measuring cup and then add more water. And then therefore you get all the juices out of your can. I personally do not like to add water, but I would follow the instructions the first time that you do this and go from there. Now we let this simmer for 20 minutes with a lid partially on. We have let our sauce simmer for about 20 minutes. The reason why we're letting it simmer is so that all those flavors can cook down and become together. The onion, the garlic, the salt, the pepper, the tomato, it's all working together to make that yummy sauce that we all know and love. You can see here it's bubbling a little bit. That's a simmer. That's not a rolling boil, that's just a simmer, which is what you want. So we're just gonna stir this together a little bit like so, as you can see. And then we are going to add our meatballs. Just kind of drop them with your tongs back into the sauce. And we're going to stir that a little bit, but be careful so you don't break your meatballs up because you want them to be whole. So we're just gonna drop them in here, stir them together a little bit, and then we're gonna let it cook for another 20 minutes so that the meatballs are cooked through and all that goodness in the meatball from the sauce and the meatball is all worked together. While we are cooking our sauce, we're gonna move on to our noodles. We're gonna cook spaghetti. Now, today I have angel hair pasta, which is just thinner spaghetti. You can do thick spaghetti, you can do thin spaghetti, you can do whatever you prefer. Just take note that there is a serving suggestion for the spaghetti on the side of the box. So you just take your fistful and you can see how many servings it makes. You also need a large to medium pot with water. I filled my large pot with about 3 quarts of water, and you're gonna need salt. Do not put salt in your water until it is rolling boil. You will scorch the bottom of your pot with the salt and it will ruin your pot. So do not add it until it is rolling boiled, which it is not now. But I just wanna take this and show you the serving thing, or how to do that. So I just take some pasta out, get it all one length here, like you do with paper. And I'm gonna take the measuring on the side here and just kind of put it like that. And I have about 2.5 servings roughly on in my hand here. So when it rolling boils, you can either take your pasta and break it in half, which I don't like to do after being taught to eat it the Italian way with a spoon and you twirl the fork and everything. I like to leave my spaghetti whole. So it's up to you. I'm just gonna put it in the pot, let it boil, and it all cooks through. Even though it doesn't cook the same all the way at the same time, it still cooks through and you have perfectly pasta all the time. You can also either take a piece out and taste it to see if it's done, or you can throw it against the wall and let it stick. Throwing it against the wall, it's fun, but it makes a mess. So you choose how much of a mess you want to make. Our water has come to a rolling boil. If you look past the steam, you can see the water bubbling underneath, and you can actually hear it if you listen hard. So we are going to add our salt. You want a good pinch, a good pinch or so, probably about a tablespoon, half a tablespoon to a tablespoon of water, or of salt to your water. Because this is the only time you get to season your pasta. So I showed you my 2.5 size servings. So we're just gonna put this right in the pot. I'm actually gonna put the other portion of my box that's in there as well. And then you can take a spoon and just kind of stir it in. Now my pot is large enough that my pasta, you can see, just sunk right in there. And you're gonna stir it around just a little bit. You wanna cook it for about 7 or 8 minutes to al dente. Al dente means that it has no bite in it. You can't break it apart anymore, and it doesn't have, it's soft and not breakable. Our basil, like our parsley, you just hold it here and pull the leaf off, like this. And then you're going to kind of stack it. Just kind of stack it up. And if you have big leaves like this one here, like these two, put them on the bottom and then stack your basil into it and kind of roll it up like this. And you're gonna take your knife and you're gonna chiffonade or thinly slice to make little ribbons. And I'll show you what the ribbon looks like here in a second. So when you pull it apart, or kind of take it apart, you can see there's little ribbons in there. So it kind of looks like confetti that you would put in the bottom of a package. And we're just gonna take this and sprinkle it into over our sauce and then stir it in. This is our fresh bowl of homemade meatballs and spaghetti sauce with cooked pasta. This bowl is definitely made with love. Welcome to Tip Talk with Mama Ro. This is the part of the episode where we talk tips for our spaghetti and meatballs. Your frozen meat. If you have meat in the freezer and need to use it for this recipe, please by all means go right for it. When I bring my meat home from the store, I actually buy it in bulk, and it's like 6.5 pounds. So I divide it and I weigh it out into 1 pound increments. I put it in a quart-sized bag. I push all the air out of it and lay it flat, like a sheet, like you would on a cookie sheet or something. And it stores better in the freezer that way. And then when you defrost it, I just put it in a bowl or like a foot bath kind of basin in the sink with water, room temperature water in it, and it's defrosted in about 2.5 to 3 hours. It's a good tip to remember when you are trying to have freezer space as well. If you need to substitute pork, by all means go right ahead. If you don't like the taste of it, if it's against your religion, whatever the case may be, please by all means do not use pork. Just make sure you're aware of the fat content of your beef. You need an 80% meat and up to make sure that your fat is not too much. When working with garlic, there is this scent that's left on your hand. To remove this scent, you can use the back of a spoon or rub your hands on your kitchen sink faucet. When working with garlic also, be aware of how large your garlic clove is. I used about half of the garlic that was actually called for that recipe because my garlic cloves were so large. You need a medium, when they call for garlic, you need a medium-sized garlic clove. So be aware of how big your clove is, because if it's small, you can do 2 for a medium. If it's large, you can use 1 for 2 cloves of a medium garlic clove. When I cook my spaghetti and meatballs, I like to use a cast iron Dutch oven. This is something that I've always just used in the kitchen in the past couple of years, and I absolutely love it. But I have to be aware of the temperature in my cast iron. The longer it cooks, the hotter it gets. So be aware of the temperature on your burner and how hot it is coming through in the cast iron. During this video, we had to open the doors, turn the fans on, turn the vent fan on. It wasn't on the film, but we had to do it outside of the film because we were about to set the fire alarm off in my house due to all the smoke. So just be aware of how hot your heat is in your pot. When I mush the tomatoes, I mush them in the can over the pot or in the can separately. If you do not feel comfortable doing this, please take an extra bowl, a large mixing bowl, and gently pour the tomatoes into that bowl and smush them, and then you can dump that gently into your pot as well. When working with onions, please make sure to not rub your eyes. You know when you chop your onion and your eyes water and it gets all up in your nasal passages and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed, I'm gonna cry, why am I crying? It's the onion cry. It's gonna happen. Most onions, it's gonna happen. That's okay. Just don't rub your eyes with the hand that you've been touching onion with. please wash your hands first because you don't want that onion back into your eyes because it'll make it way worse than it needs to be. I talked about following the recipe and that I don't add water to my sauce. This is okay. I've made this sauce a couple times and I figured out how saucy and watery I like my spaghetti sauce. You may like it extra thin, you may like it thicker. This can be controlled by how much water you add or do not add. If you add too much water, just cook it a little longer on the stove, it'll reduce down. If you feel like there's too much water in it as well, do not put the lid on the pot when it says to cover the pot with the lid halfway. I actually don't cover it, I just let it boil down because I like how watery my sauce is without that step. When cooking your meatballs and you put them in the bottom of your pot and you use all the brown bits on the bottom of your pot, that's all that goodness and that flavor for your sauce, make sure that you have just about a tablespoon left of meat fat in your pot before you add your onions and garlic and tomatoes. If there's too much of that meat fat in there, you will never be able to reduce that down enough and it will be this greasy fattiness on top. It's okay to eat, it's great, it tastes wonderful, but it doesn't look very appealing and it kind of separates your sauce. So if you have too much fat in the bottom of your pot, please remove that fat before you add the fresh ingredients. Let's talk pasta. There are many different ways to make spaghetti and meatballs. We can have spaghetti, you can have angel hair pasta like we use, you can have the thick spaghetti, you can have fettuccine, you can have macaroni style, you can have penne. There's multiple types of pasta. Choose your pasta. Choose what you want to eat and cook it to the al dente state. The other thing to look for in the store is a pot-sized pasta. So instead of being the long spaghetti noodles, it's about yay long and it fits right into your pot without breaking it like I showed you. That's totally your call. You choose what kind of pasta you want to eat. Pasta doneness. Now, I don't know about you, but my mama taught me to throw my pasta against the wall. If it stays there, it's done. You can also remove a piece and be careful because it's going to be hot and taste it. If it's soft and chewy and has just a little bit of a bite to it, which means that it's a hard, like almost uncooked, that's a great state to have it because it'll kind of cook a little more in your sauce. If it's still too chewy and it feels like it's uncooked, you need to cook it longer. So just be aware of the doneness and follow the package directions minus about 1 minute or so. But again, if you throw it against the wall, it's a little messy, but it's fun and you know it's cooked. Thanks for joining us on Tip Talk. I'm Mama Ro. We'll see you later.